If you're looking to buy your first home in Toronto, you've come to the right place. One big cost a lot of first-time buyers in Toronto make and they don't consider before buying the first home is your closing costs. Closing costs just aren't a small amount of money that you can not think about and write off at the end of the transaction. It's a major cost that should be budgeted for, and you should go into the transaction expecting to pay these fees. So in episode 2 of the first time buyer to-do list, we're going to break down a lot of the major costs when it comes to closing costs, see what we should be budgeting for, and get an understanding what closing costs are and what should be expected upon closing. We're going to start with the most expensive and the most significant closing costs that you're going to be experiencing will be your land transfer tax, which is a one-time fee paid to the government upon closing of the transaction. And this can be a pretty significant fee. This type of fee is based off of the purchase price of the property that you purchase. Let me take a snippet of my first time buyer guide that I give to all my clients before they buy their first home. And you'll see over here it's a sliding scale. For the first $55,000, you're paying 0.5% land transfer tax. For the next $195,000, you're paying 1% land transfer tax on that amount. The next $150,000, you're paying 1.5% land transfer tax. And then anything between $400,000 to $2 million, so the next $1.6 million, you are paying 2% land transfer tax. And anything over $2 million, anything extra, let's say it's a $2 million home, plus you're paying a 2.5% land transfer tax. Does that sound confusing? It might. I'll give you a quick example to kind of show you what I mean by this. Let's use an example of a condo that's outside of Toronto, but in Ontario, that sells for $650,000. You're looking at the first $55,000 at 0.5%. So you're paying $275. The next $195,000, you're paying 1%, which is $1,950. The next $150,000, you're paying 1.5% tax, which is $2,250. And then the remainder of that cost falls between the $400,000 to $2 million price point. So we're paying 2% on that amount, which in the end is $250,000 at a percent of 2% at $5,000. In total, we'd be paying a land transfer tax for Ontario of $9,475. You'll see as we increase the purchase price of the property, slowly but surely the marginal tax rate went up as well. Good thing to note is no matter what, it's a sliding scale. So the first $55,000 will always be at 0.5%. And the next $195,000 will always be at 1%. It's only when we get to, let's say, the $400,000 or the $2 million range, we get to that 2%. And of course, if we find a property that's over $2 million, we get to 2.5% of anything extra after $2 million. As a first-time buyer, we're probably not looking at that $2 million price point, even in Toronto, so that's some sort of good news. And if that didn't sound expensive enough, there actually may be a possibility that you spend for 2 land transfer taxes. If you're buying a property in the city of Toronto, you not only pay the Ontario government a land transfer tax, you also pay Toronto a land transfer tax as well. So a good rule of thumb is to double the amount of money budgeted if you're planning to buy in Toronto versus outside, let's say Mississauga, Durham, Barrie. The moment you're in Toronto, you're paying that second land transfer tax. It's calculated very similarly to the Ontario land transfer tax. So it's a good rule of thumb just to double that budget when it comes to a land transfer tax there. I use that same example from before. Let's say that exact same condo that was $650,000 sold inside of Toronto instead of outside of Toronto. You'll be spending not only $9,475, we're going to double that and we're going to be spending $18,950 for a land transfer tax for a property in Toronto. Here's some good news. As someone who's a first-time buyer like yourself, you actually qualify for a rebate on your land transfer tax up to $8,475. Now, this rebate does depend on a couple things. Number one, you have to be a first-time buyer. The amount of the rebate does change as you change purchase prices. So your lower purchase prices may not get the full rebate. You also get the full purchase price or the rebate back if you buy in Toronto versus outside of Ontario. So it can change that price point. But the good thing is, as a first-time buyer, you do have an opportunity to save some money on a very expensive closing cost. That's the most amount of math we're going to be doing today with the land transfer tax. Let's move on to a couple of other closing expenses, not as big as costs, but also very important to consider. Most likely your second biggest cost, but actually a very valuable part of your real estate team is your lawyer fees. Your lawyer is going to take that transaction from the purchase to the actual closing of the transaction. And that's a huge part of the deal because in the end, that actually can be a very stressful time. If there's any problems with closing, they're going to deal with that. Having a good lawyer on your team is extremely valuable, but it's something to consider cost-wise. You're usually looking anywhere between $1,200 and $2,000 in my experience. They may vary a bit off that price point, but my honest opinion is you don't want to cheap out on a lawyer because you want someone really good on your team to help that transaction be successful. Another cost to consider is your appraisal. When you are buying a home and you have to end up getting financing from a bank, the bank's going to want to see if that property is worth the dollar that you paid for. So what your mortgage company will require you to do is to pay for an appraiser to go to the property, take a look at the property, get a sense of the property, and they're going to get an appraisal report done where they're going to go to the bank and say, hey, this property is worth the price that you paid for. But those costs aren't free, unfortunately. You are paying someone to go out to the property and appraise the property. It will take some time. And that's something that I typically would budget anywhere between $500 and maybe $800. I've seen it follow in that range before, but in the end, it's a thing that has to get done and has to get done for the property to close. One thing I've talked about this channel for sure is getting a home inspection done. That's a part of your closing costs. If you're paying a home inspector to go look at the property and give you a good report or a good sense of what the property is, that's going to cost you some money as well. I would say anywhere between, again, maybe $500 and $800 for a home inspection report. Again, get a good home inspector. I wouldn't cheap out on a home inspection if you can get one done. A good home inspector will give you a good sense of what's going on, but it's going to cost you some money, and it's good to budget at least 1 or 2 inspections during your home buying experience. One small expense to consider is title insurance. It's something that you're going to be paying through your lawyer to get done. I've seen that cost anywhere between $200, $300, $400 in that price point, and it's something that your mortgage is going to require that you get to protect your mortgage. And lastly, one last main expense that I typically consider is your moving expenses. And the one key thing about moving expenses is this is going to vary the most. You might have family that can help you move. You might move yourself. You might hire movers to get it done. You may want to get some packing supplies. It will vary based on the person and the size of the move. I typically tell people $1,000 is a pretty healthy budget. With that being said, the one thing that I really pride myself on my business is I actually supply a lot of the moving supplies for my first-time buyer clients. Moving can be expensive, and if I can get help with that cost a little bit on my end, I actually give my clients, they're called frog boxes. Google them, really cool service. But if I can help my clients with some expenses, it's always really good. But otherwise, you're looking, I would budget about $1,000 as expenses, unless let's say you're getting professional movers to help you, then maybe a little more of a higher price point you should be looking at. A lot of these costs we went over today are pretty manageable. If you have a budget set out and you know what you're getting into, it's not something that you should be surprised upon closing that you have to pay these expenses. So I find it's really nice when you're getting into the idea, okay, I'm going to buy a home, I need my down payment, have those closing costs with you. If you have those budgeted as well, you're for sure going to have a smooth transaction and nothing to worry about. And speaking of a smooth transaction, my name is Gabriela Batista from Homes into Reality. If you're a first-time buyer in Toronto looking to make your first big move in that first big home, I'm more than happy to touch base. I'm a Toronto real estate agent, and I help a lot of first-time buyers with their first-time buying goals. So I'm happy to touch base, talk about what you're looking to do. All of my information is in the description, my phone number, my email. If you want to book a calendar call with me, you can do so as well. And I look forward to helping more first-time buyers getting started on their journey. Anyways, I'm happy to help. See you next week. Talk soon. Bye.